5 o'clock. So before we commence the meeting, can I remind everyone present the meeting will be live streamed, or is being live streamed, as well as recorded via the internet, and the recording archived for future viewing. I'll leave it at future viewing. I note, I think when the leader says anything, he refers to posterity. I'm not sure we can manage to keep it for as long as that, but we'll do the best we can, I'm sure. So, welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee for 2022. Wish everybody Happy New Year. Let's hope it's going to be that. So, we can start the meeting. Agenda 1, apologies for absence.
No apologies received by Democratic, Chair.
No one else giving apologies for anyone? No? Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of December. Members happy? Anyone happy to move those as a correct record?
Yes, move we note.
And second, thank you very much both. Okay then, received declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, silence, good. Okay then, agenda item 4, which is a reference from the Healthy Living and Social Care Scrutiny Committee, Children and Young People Services Annual Placement Review. So I'm assuming that's you, Rachel?
It is indeed. Good evening, everyone. Some common members in terms of the Scrutiny Committee that it's been referred from, but I'll work on the basis that there aren't. This is the annual report. It has been to this committee before, so some of you may be familiar with it, but essentially it's a report that outlines the actions taken within Children's Services alongside its partners during 2021, so we are looking back with regard to placement provision for children looked after and priority actions for the current year, which of course comes to an end at the end of March. It goes without saying that placement expenditure is an area of volatility for us. Scarcity of resource plus cost of resource are both challenging and volatile. And we're talking primarily about children with complex needs, whether that's complexity in terms of behaviour or disability, where we're having the greatest challenges in terms of placement identification. There are other things that impact our placement resource, and they include things like When I'm Ready, which is a Welsh scheme in terms of quite appropriately supporting children in foster care to remain in those placements post 18, like many of our own children would. Remain at home with us as parents, and also remand placements. So there are challenges for us, for example, when children either for criminal activity or welfare grounds are remanded to the care of the local authority. But the most significant thing that I'd want to talk to you about this evening is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's not going to come as any surprise to you at all, but it is the largest part of this report in terms of some of the factors that have influenced demand into the service and then our ability to respond to that demand in a way that we would usually. So we've got demand increases, and these are being sustained since this report was written, since the period that it refers to. Increased demand into the service across all areas of activity. So more referrals at the front door, more children in need of support and in need of protection, more children looked after, more complexity, more care proceedings, and more children where we're needing to ask for the assistance of the court in terms of significant harm. And all of that has impacted service delivery. So that won't be any different to what you're hearing from other parts of the council or from external agencies, but it is significant and it is persisting, and they aren't levels of demand that we will recover from easily. So your CLA population doesn't increase in a pandemic and then decrease because suddenly everybody's vaccinated, if that makes sense. That child has become looked after, and that child has needs that need to be met. And of course, the ultimate plan is to return a child to their family, but that takes time, and that doesn't necessarily have clear timescales. So we have a corporate strategy. Key members of the council, so housing, education, health externally, third sector partners externally, are part of our corporate strategy. And that provides a framework for us with 4 key objectives, which are in the document that you're looking at, and key principles that relate to that. So essentially, how we support children in a timely manner early on, how we support children when they become looked after, how we support children to return home. So essentially, that kind of journey of the child working with as much effort at each stage of that process. I think collectively, people on the screen, Partners from Education would comment the same. I think very proud really of the way that we've continued to maintain momentum during the pandemic in terms of that strategy and achieving the actions within the action plan, and that's been really important to us. So we are able to reflect progress, and we're continuing to meet, and we meet next, for example, next week. But there are delays in moving some actions forward. That's understandable, and there are challenges evident that won't surprise you. Just to observe briefly, our looked after population increased during 2016 and 19. 2019-20 actually decreased, and that coincided with Welsh Government intentions around the safe reduction of children looked after. And they've required us to, 3 years ago, to set a series of intentions for us in terms of where we would reduce our population. We were successful in reducing the population, as we said we would, up to March 2020, and it won't have escaped you, of course, that that's when the pandemic hit. So we have seen during the course of the last nearly 2 years now significant increases in our numbers of children looked after that are directly related to those challenges, and more children in in-house fostering placements, more children in external foster placements, and more, well, broadly the same number of children in residential care, but escalation of children who would normally be able to be supported in foster care. We've seen some escalation into residential care, although it still remains the case that the majority of our children looked after, your children looked after, are placed with kin, either with parents or with wider family. We pay a lot of attention to where our children are placed, so always looking to place them as closely as possible. Of course, that's become more difficult, but we report to Welsh Government, for example, on things like the numbers of children placed out of area and placed outside of Wales. And we're broadly happy with those numbers when you consider the situation that we're in, but they do change. We have, as I've already said, have a relatively stable residential population, but those children aren't the same as they were 18 months, 2 years ago. And we've certainly seen costs increase in terms of external fostering placements and residential placements, and our reliance on externally commissioned care has increased. Just a couple of observations in relation to the budget. There was some underspend in 2021, but that was in the context of an increased budget. And this year, we're forecasting an overspend in the region of £1 million. We've obviously got actions to address the challenges that we're experiencing. So annually, we undertake an audit with partners looking at those children in externally commissioned care, thinking very carefully about opportunities to step children out of externally commissioned care. But it won't escape you that the most important thing for children looked after is stability. So you can't just move a child because it costs less to place them somewhere else if that doesn't meet their needs. We've got a foster care recruitment strategy, and we're part of the National Foster Wales campaign that I'm hoping you've heard of, in terms of driving up the numbers of foster care applicants, assessments and approvals. We have a joint budget, have for a number of years, with education for residential placements. I'm hoping colleagues on the call from education would comment positively about that. That means that we're making decisions collectively, take some of the heat out of those conversations. And we've got some shared commitments in terms of clearly only placing children in residential care where we need to, and then as effectively as possible. We report quarterly to Welsh Government in terms of the reduction of the numbers of children looked after. And although the targets we set 3 years ago we will never meet because our population has gone up. I would say to you that you can see a lot of progress under those headings. So a lot of prevention of admissions to care, even though we are admitting children and moving children on, for example, to adoption and adoption orders, but also discharging care orders where children are with parents or wider family. And we're making some strides in terms of developing some local residential accommodation in partnership with the third sector. And that's it in terms of what I wanted to say to you, but questions, of course.
Okay, Rachel, thank you for that. Perhaps I can't see anyone indicating at the moment to speak. I don't know whether the Cabinet member wants to add anything to Rachel's.
Thank you, Chair. It's, as noted in the reference from Health and Living Social Care Scrutiny Committee, I just want to reiterate we'll always place the needs of the child above conversations about cutting funding from budgets, and we have an existing reserve within social services in order to deal with the flux in demand that we have throughout any given year, as I'm sure you'll know from your time in my position. So I think just wanted to reiterate that and congratulate the team on actually increasing the number of foster carers we have. So although we have had a massive increase proportionately in that external need for placements, we have also been doing, the office has been doing some incredible work in terms of expanding the number of Vale foster carers, and we really do want to try and push that, and the Foster Wales campaign is really key to try and get an identity to what is the local council's opportunity to support foster carers, and actually we can be a lot better in helping give that support to those people who want to become foster carers. So just to add some highlight to those points, and then if there are any questions that stray more into what I need to answer, then I'll happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Member. Vice Chairman Rhiannon.
Thank you. I haven't really got questions because I've read the report and it's very thorough. But what I would like to do is say how useful it is that this is brought to our attention, because as an ex-classroom practitioner, the more we know about the children we have in front of us, the better we are to be able to treat them as individuals rather than just bums on seats. And I think that it's very important that, you've talked about continuity of care, about the children not being moved around, etc., because of budgetary considerations. And I can only reinforce that because it is so important. So I would like to thank you for that, and, to emphasise the importance of this being addressed in a kind of cross-committee way. And in fact, it's one of those reports I feel should go to every single committee, because I don't think people realise how cases like these impinge on every single part of the council's working. I mean, certainly, I drew the attention of the chair of corporate resources to the report, because obviously he needs to know where the money is going that he's so carefully safeguards. So no, I just like to thank you for the report, and thank you, Ben, for turning up to field any flack you think might be coming your way.
Thank you.
Well, I'd hope there's going to be no flack, because as the Cabinet member said, I've had experience of this in the past, and I'm aware of the problems, and I'm also aware from many years ago as a legal practitioner in this field how very difficult the situation is. I was just going to ask, obviously we've had with the current variant of COVID-19, I'm assuming, is that having quite an impact at the moment on the on staffing levels?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm grateful for the opportunity to comment on the virus itself, in the sense that I just wanted to reassure members that we obviously have had to be creative and amend some of the ways that we've been supporting families, particularly in the height of the pandemic. But I would want to reassure you that safeguarding is pretty much been how it is normally. So you can't assess safeguarding child protection situations from behind a screen. So we have been present all of the time in relation to those situations. So full PPE, as you might expect, risk assessments, making sure all those things are covered off. But we are in person and learning where virtual works well as well to complement that position too. Yes, we are seeing the impact of more COVID cases now than we have ever before amongst our staff groups, whether that's individuals themselves or family members. And some teams are impacted more than others, but not to the extent that we're not functioning in the way that you would expect us to be. But we are very seriously making sure that staff are abiding to mechanisms for reducing the spread of the virus.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got two more now. Is this something new? Either Councillor Thomas has got his hands up, I've got two hands up, or it's just shown that he's number 2 in the list of speakers. I'm assuming that's what it is. So we've got firstly Councillor Perks, Sandra, if you go first, and then we'll follow on with Neil.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I was interested in the project for the young adults where they're able to stay with their foster carers until they're 21. Sorry, I can't access my papers at the moment. So on there, is there a number that we have within the Vale? Do you know what the numbers are of young adults wanting to stay with their foster carers until they're 21? And I think I read in there that it's wanting to encourage more foster carers to offer that facility for people. If you just talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So yes, when I'm ready, it's been around for some years. It's obviously has to be a shared decision between the foster carers and the individual. I can't think of any situations where that hasn't been supported and gone forward. I would want to make sure my information was accurate and come back to you with the number if that's okay. But the principle is a really important one. In some ways, the reason it's in this report is because it impacts on the availability of some mainstream placements, because of course it's an unfortunate way to say it, but it takes up a placement. But that isn't the wrong thing, because that's about stability for our care leavers. But it has had some impact, but we wouldn't want that to be seen as a negative impact. But I can certainly come back to you with the numbers, no problem.
That would be lovely, and I very much saw it as a positive. Really, yes. that there's that ability for a young person to stay for that little bit longer. Really, thank you.
As yours would and mine would.
Yes. Tell me about it. I've got a 26-year-old. Yes.
Thank you.
Neil.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel. Exemplary as usual. Sorry about the dog barking. She wants a dinner. You commented on the effect of COVID and the delays to work, but perhaps one of the things that should be noted in this is the care orders and so on, and the discharge of care orders, and how that's being held up by the court system, which has got a backlog due to COVID, and that the figures would actually look a little bit different. We'll be able to process some of those cases more rapidly, but that, as I say, is being held up by what we're seeing with the courts. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. And we've seen different stages of that. So certainly at the beginning, when they were prioritising safeguarding applications, we were asked, for example, not to make applications for adoption orders because that wasn't an emergency. We've seen some easement in terms of the court capacity, but sometimes our capacity hasn't been there, or our legal department's capacity hasn't been there. But we're certainly seeing some greater opportunities now to make some applications and achieve those discharges. And it continues to be a focus of our Children Looked After team to very much say, right, are we now at a stage with this family, with this individual child, sibling group, where we can consider a discharge application.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. I'm assuming that obviously for the neighbouring authorities that we've got, obviously we've only got the absolute figures for numbers, but I assume they publish similar information to we do on, the type of categories: residential care, fostering. Do we match? Is it fairly similar across all the local authorities?
Yes. So individual authorities children looked after numbers will be different, but there is a general upward trend, and authorities struggling absolutely with capacity internally, and needing to look more so to externally commissioned care, but very much trying to strive to increase their numbers of foster carers. So I would say that they are broad themes across the nation, across Wales.
Okay, thank you. And looking at you've obviously only got figures for the other authorities up to March of last year. I assume that's probably sometimes the figures aren't always immediately available. I don't know.
Yes.
But it's difficult trying to work out without seeing, as a sort of proportion of the population. Again, are we pretty much in line? I looking at it, I would have thought Merthyr is probably quite high looking at those figures, even though they're below us because of the population.
Yes, and exactly that. I mean, we'll be looking at those figures much more clearly with the annual publication of statistics at reflecting the end of March, but slightly after that they'll come out, because that's really interesting to us. Except that in some ways, whatever is going on for somebody else, you're dealing with what's going on for you as a local authority, but from the conversations that I have with my counterparts in other local authorities, there is nobody who is in a better or different position.
Yeah, I assume that was the case. Cabinet member wants to come back in.
Yeah, sorry, if it's okay, Chair, just to make 2 points. Clearly, there's been an ongoing CLA review in terms of numbers across all 22 authorities that the First Minister was very keen to do, and so there is quite a lot of information that goes beyond just hard numbers, and clearly the case from all 22 authorities has been it's assessing against their own position, and on the corporate parenting panel, we've looked at those in some detail. And then just to also highlight, you've probably seen in the national news about the Home Office looking to I can't think of a better phrase than redistribute those unaccompanied children who've come over as refugees around the whole of the UK. And I think in that context, it's just important to understand just how under pressure and how big the demand already is within our authority and then all of the other authorities. And just to note that, the capacity for that, not to introduce a whole new subject, but clearly in the context of education and having those, everything in place to support the children you have in your care, those are challenges that potentially other authorities are facing, and just to highlight, those pressures are being added. Although I'm of the strong view we're not in a position to offer any places, unfortunately, to move children into the authority area. But just to say there are lots of themes affecting children looked after numbers across the country, and that is a big elephant in the room, unfortunately.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. Rachel, want to add to that?
Just really to support those observations, really. So I think when we're writing this report for next year, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children will feature as one of the areas of demand. There's a position being taken in relation to mandating local authorities in terms of taking a defined number of children in so many cycles. Cycles are periods of time. And we're in some discussion as 22 local authorities, but specifically for us in relation to how we respond to that ask regionally with Cardiff. So these are discussions that are evolving all of the time, but are really reflective of course, an understandable desperate situation for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, but on top of a desperate situation often for the Vale of Glamorgan's children.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Oh, Neil?
Oops. Yeah, thank you, Judge. Basically, it's on this particular strand that we're talking about. The numbers are going up for everybody across Wales. Our neighbouring counties are, as you've observed, Chair, are experiencing similar stresses and strains in terms of finding placements and finding foster carers and so on, and basically we're all fishing in the same very small pool at the moment. what was discussed at one point in the Healthy Living Scrutiny Committee was members of the council, elected members and so on, using their social media contacts and so on to advertise and support advertising from our comms department, looking for social care, looking for foster carers and so on. And I believe that a number of us have actually forwarded things like that around. I just wonder whether members of this committee would be interested in supporting Rachel in those efforts and invite her to send links and so on that can be then shared on social media. Thank you.
I wouldn't have thought there'd been any objection from anyone, any member of this committee in that, because I think we obviously realise the impact it has on education and it's the importance of making sure these children are properly cared for and well looked after. So I have no problem with that. Obviously, I know it's a very difficult thing recruiting foster carers. I remember going back many years ago and attending events where we tried to do that, and we have a mixed response, I know, but I think over the years we've done pretty well in recruitment. So I'm sure we're all happy to do that. Anyway, drawing the matter to an end, can I thank Rachel for a very comprehensive report and the responses she's given us this afternoon. Thank you to the Cabinet member for attending. I think, I'm not sure there's really any recommendations particularly we'd want to put from this committee, but if we perhaps just note the report and thank the department for its hard work, and it's, in very difficult circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Happy with that?
Yeah, I'd like to endorse that. I'm sure we all would.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Rachel. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish to do so. But I can appreciate probably you've got a lot of demands on your time. And again,
it was lovely to see you. Thank you.
The same to the Cabinet member. If he wants to stay and listen to the rest, he can. But if he wants to go, well, fair enough.
I'm going to get a head start on Penarth Town Council and get my dinner in beforehand. So see you then.
Goodbye,
thank you, Gordon.
Bye-bye.
Well, I'm sure if anyone wants to leave for Penarth Town Council, I'm sure that shows great dedication. I'm sure. Right, moving on then. Agenda item 5. Again, we've got COVID here, unfortunately, but the agenda item 5, the impact of COVID-19 on literacy skills.
Thank you very much, Chair. Nosatha, everybody. And yes, it is a continuation on the theme of COVID. And this time we're focusing on the impact of COVID on pupils' literacy skills in the Vale of Glamorgan. And I'm joined tonight by Catherine Billington-Richards, who's a strategic lead for languages, literacy and communication at Central South Consortium. We have had several presentations, as well as the earlier discussion tonight. We've had several presentations over the last few months discussing the impact of COVID on schools and learners in particular. And there's actually strong correlation tonight with some of the messages we already heard, for example, in the presentation on remote and blended learning, how COVID has impacted on the use of the pupil development grant, and then the presentation we had on the impact of COVID on the social, emotional and mental health of children and young people. But as I mentioned, we're going to focus specifically in this session on pupils' literacy skills. And there will be 3 parts to the presentation. First of all, how COVID has impacted on pupils' oracy, reading and writing skills. And then how schools are addressing that impact, firstly through priorities in the school development plans, and secondly through the use of the Welsh Government Recruit, Recover, Raise Standards, Accelerating Learning Programme grant. And then thirdly, we'll be discussing the CSC Literacy Strategy and the professional learning offer that's provided to schools within the Vale of Glamorgan as part of that strategy, and to support schools to address the impact of COVID. There is a paper included as part of the papers for this evening, and you will see that the written report, contains a lot of examples from across schools in the Vale, and hopefully that will give you a flavour in terms of how schools, sort of are responding to the challenges that they're facing in relation to literacy. So I'm going to hand over now to Kath, who's going to start by talking about the impact of COVID on pupils' literacy skills. Diolch, Kath.
Diolch, Carys. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to be with you this evening. If I'm looking away from my camera, it's purely because I'm looking at the report on a different screen, so I'm not trying to be rude to anyone. So I'm going to start us off just by talking about Oracy. So I know you can see from the report that in the primary phase, nearly all of our primary schools are reporting that pupils have sort of regressed slightly with their use of Oracy, and this is presenting particularly in the aspect of socialisation and interaction, and they feel that pupils' confidence when talking to each other has been very much impacted. When we talk about the social interaction, it's the turn taking, it's the tolerance, it's the being able to read sort of non-verbal cues as part of communication that we're really seeing come to the fore as a result of the school closures. In secondary, it's very similar, but we're also seeing greater reluctance to speak with our secondary students. When we would move to sort of remote learning, it wasn't uncommon, for example, for many of our secondary learners to have their cameras off when there were live sessions and be very reluctant to engage in any kind of oral communication. And this is now presenting as they're going back to school. As well as that sort of reluctance and lack of confidence, what we're seeing is an increase in kind of dialect phrases and informal communication because they've got out of the habit and the practice of using that more formal standardised English that they would in school. What we're also seeing is impacting Oracy is the word gap increasing. Now, there's been a huge amount written about the word gap and where it comes from, and it's not just affecting socially economically deprived pupils, although it is more prevalent in children that come from challenged backgrounds. But children's vocabulary acquisition has been impacted. It had been impacted pre-COVID. There were lots and lots of reports about the impact of the word gap on accessing the curriculum, but due to the lockdown periods, we are seeing that the word gap has increased over that time. And what that means and how that presents is children not having the vocabulary or the sentence patterns to communicate their emotions and their feelings, which also, when we look at Oracy for well-being, not just Oracy as a vehicle for learning, it's obviously impacting their social and emotional well-being as well. And we know that the word gap increases as children go through school. So children who start school with a word gap, having that word gap, it stops you being able to learn more vocabulary. So that word gap actually increases over time. So that's obviously proven quite problematic at the moment. I'll talk later on in the session about what we're doing as an organisation to support that. I think the causes of that are numerous. So schools had very different approaches to learning over the closure period. Some had live lessons, some didn't. But even the schools that had live lessons, pupils weren't always able to engage in those live lessons for a number of reasons. And so that variability of that first lockdown period is sort of playing through with regards to Oracy in that way. We do have some great practice in the local authority, and we've highlighted a little example there for you from St Cyries. I will say St Cyries have done a huge amount generally with literacy over the last year and are making some really good progress. So if you're looking for examples of schools that have really worked to tackle that with that word gap, that Oracy issue, we've got some little vignettes there as well. I mean, the issue is similar with the Welsh medium schools. I think with Welsh medium, and Carys may want to join in here, obviously with children attending Welsh medium education, quite often they're not coming from backgrounds where we have fluent Welsh speakers, and so their ability to use Welsh is obviously limited when they're in an English medium background at home. I don't know if you wanted to add anything there, Carys, or...
Just to say, in the majority of cases, that's short term when they've started back in school, and the language immersion techniques used by teachers has been very successful in the majority of cases, especially with the older pupils. Where there's been more of a challenge and it's more difficult is with some of the younger pupils, in particular foundation phase, and there's more intensive work ongoing in relation to that. But as Catherine mentioned, it's a case of some of these pupils were not hearing the language at home, and sort of then had regressed in terms of their confidence. But I would emphasise that in a majority of cases that has been short term.
Thanks, Caris. Then we move on to reading, and we see more variation really at a school level with what's happened with reading. We can see patterns with oracy and patterns with writing when I come on to talk about that, but with reading there's greater variation, and I think that's because predominantly children through their distance learning were accessing some forms of reading throughout the closure period, whereas the oracy and the writing perhaps less so. Certainly with our younger children, we're noticing that the phonic development is not as secure, and so this has led to schools needing to go back and revisit their phonic provision. Some schools, are sort of saying that it's had very little impact, but it's a few schools where that's the case. Again, we've got some sort of vignettes there from schools that have really engage in some effective practice to tackle issues around reading that are definitely worth having a look at. And again, from a secondary point of view, we've seen again since Irish School work really hard with us actually over the closure period and beyond at sort of improving the consistency of approach with regards to the pedagogy and teaching of reading. And you can see if you have the opportunity to have a little look, there are some YouTube videos of actual classroom practice there where the department has really strived to have that consistent and rigorous approach towards reading. So that's something we're very much advocating. I think when it comes to writing, I think that the thing that we need to acknowledge straight away is that writing is the most cognitively demanding skill that we can ask a child to do in literacy. It's not just thinking about the content of what they write, it's also thinking about the technical accuracy, the construction of the writing as well. So that places a huge cognitive demand on children, and it's definitely the area that's taken quite a significant impact from what schools are telling us with regards to pupils' literacy skills. With writing as well, what we found during the closure period is that children would be doing writing potentially, but there's a difference to assigning writing to being taught writing, and it's that explicit teaching of writing and therefore the level of technical accuracy control over writing that we're seeing slip, we're seeing regress. We have put some information there about a comparative judgment pilot that we took part in back in 2020 that sort of tells you what the writing standards at different year groups were like at that point in time, and you can see that there's quite a significant regression. That closure period had a huge impact, and when you look at what the evidence about writing says, it's that children need to be writing for sort of a minimum of 15 minutes a day. It needs to be regular practice, it needs to be guided practice, it needs to be something that they develop fluency with over time. And of course, during the lockdown periods, they weren't having that fluency, they weren't revisiting it on a regular basis. So it is natural that there is that decline, and that we are seeing some green shoots coming out the other side of that. However, this continues to be a significant investment for Central South, both in terms of time and financial resources to sort of work with schools with regards to writing. So I'm going to hand over to Caris now, who's going to talk about the school development plan priorities, and I'll come back to you later to talk through some of the professional learning we have for literacy.
Thank you, Kath. So, and as Kath mentioned, really, and it's no surprise really when you've heard in terms of the impact of COVID on, oracy, reading and writing, that there's a very strong focus on literacy and supporting pupils' literacy skills when we look at priorities of school development plans. So in terms of the Vale schools, there is a reference to improving aspects of literacy in the majority of school development plans, and the range of activities, the range of priorities relate to raising standards. Sometimes they have a specific reference to a component such as oracy, reading or writing. There's reference in some plans to developing cross-curricular literacy work. There's a lot of focus on introducing or revisiting a particular intervention to support pupils' literacy development. And particularly in light of changes in relation to the ALN Act, there's a strong focus on differentiation and ensuring appropriate provision for all pupils in the classroom. And in terms of Welsh medium schools, in terms of all Welsh medium schools, there's a reference to developing language acquisition and supporting language immersion with pupils. So you've got in the report, I'm not going to go through all the examples with you, but you've got a wide range of, different priorities and activities linked to those priorities in the written report for tonight. There's a lot of similarities, and you'll see references as well to engagement with professional learning, and we'll come back to those later on as part of this session. But if we just even take Dewi Sant as a starting point, you'll see there that they're focusing on both reading and writing, because they felt that COVID had specifically impacted on those two areas. And you'll see there's a range of different activities in place there. First of all, establishing a baseline, going back to see where those pupils are at this moment in time, and where are the gaps, and where, to support the identification of next steps. And then there's reference to interventions and particular strategies such as reading carousel, group guided reading, using Pi Corbett strategies as well, to promote the use of Oracy to promote reading and writing as well. And as part of that, a strong focus on teachers observing and sharing practice, and reflecting on what's happening in the classroom and the impact that is having on pupils' reading and writing skills. You'll see that some schools like Gladstone have made a specific reference to a group of pupils. Their focus is very much on reading, but the focus is on the more vulnerable learners. And again, you'll see that they're engaging with specific professional learning to support them with that priority in relation to Reading Reconsidered and group guided reading sessions. And again, we'll come back to the Reading Reconsidered later on in this session. And just to draw your attention, really, the other school is somewhere like Wickham Macross, where you'll see they're involving the family very much as part of their priority. So there's family workshops to stress strategies for phonics teaching, and also revisiting the home learning routines. So it's not just what's happening in the classroom, it's making sure that they're engaging the family, parents and carers with, with supporting the child's development in literacy. There's also, and you can see how this is allocated and used and in the school development plan, the use of the Recruit, Recover and Raise Standards grants, the triple RS grant. And this is additional funding that Welsh Government announced to support learners from September 2020 onwards. And it's additional funding for specific groups of learners, the ones who've been impacted most by COVID. And in terms of the schools across the Vale, many of them are using this grant to support literacy development. It's being used to fund teachers, additional teachers, or to release teachers to provide literacy interventions or targeted support for pupils, or opportunity to catch up in particular literacy skills. So that's coming through as a strong focus when you look at school development plans as well. In terms of primary schools, what we're finding is that's being used in many cases to support a range of pupils across different age ranges. In a few cases, they're using that grant with particular year groups. And what's coming through as a particular trend is years 2 and 3. That's the area where, a few schools have identified as, as an area that needs more literacy support at this moment in time. In terms of secondary, again, all secondary schools are using the grant to fund literacy skills of pupils, but there is a strong focus on examination classes. and Year 11 in particular, and in ensuring that there's additional support for English, in developing literacy skills, and also, same as primary, really, in delivering interventions and catch-up. And in terms of the Welsh medium schools, they've all used part of their funding to develop pupils' Welsh oracy skills. So that's a common theme across all of the schools, and a few also are focusing on reading. So I'll now hand over to Kath to talk about the CSE literacy strategy. Diolch, Kath.
Thanks, Carys. So as you can see on page 13 of the report, you'll see the Cfp Literacy Strategy. It's very much underpinned by the aims of Curriculum for Wales, but also very much informed by our school needs and our local authority needs. And so you can see the overall aims of the literacy plan. And I just want to talk a little bit about the professional learning that we have and the support that we have in specific areas. So with regards to Oracy, for example, you know, we see, and in the new curriculum, speaking and writing are very much linked in the new curriculum. So whereas historically we would have talked about speaking and listening, in the new curriculum, speaking sits with writing as an expressive skill, and reading and listening sit as receptive skills in a separate part, still within English and or languages and literacy and communication, but a slightly different focus. So we're really focusing on children's ability to express themselves clearly, accurately. And to do that, we're doing a number of things. So we're providing professional learning opportunities for Oracy. That comes in a number of different mediums and vehicles. So we have asynchronous content that schools can access at a time and a place that works for them individually. They can be delivered to whole schools, or they can be just with different departments and individual practitioners. But we're also running synchronous content as well, where we are running live training sessions, coaching, mentoring sessions with regards to Oracy. We've also funded regional Oracy hubs. So we had a number of schools apply to be Oracy hubs, and they are working. We are funding them to work directly with Voice 21, which is a school in London with a huge amount of expertise with regards to Oracy. And actually, we have a school in the Vale that's part of that programme. And then those schools are going to act as regional Oracy hubs and support the work of other schools, very much in line with the CSC vision. Then, you know, I know that you'll be aware, we also provide sort of bespoke coaching and support in schools for individual schools that have specific individual needs. It's very much the same approach for reading. We are supporting schools firstly on developing a rigorous reading curriculum from ages 3 all the way through to 16, and along with that we're looking at progression in reading and sequencing in reading. We're looking at early reading skills, so we've got some asynchronous content on the teaching of early reading and the importance of early reading and phonics. We're also working then beyond the phonics stage, so when a child can decode fluently, we've got various professional development programs that teachers can work with us on. For example, Carys has referenced Reading Reconsidered, which is a really intensive and rigorous reading training program which looks at improving the pedagogy and practice of reading for classroom teachers. That's been a really successful program. We're in our 3rd cohort of it, and take up it books up within 24 hours of us advertising it. So it's a very successful, very popular program, and actually there's a number of schools, St Cyri's using it in the Vale very successfully, and St Athan using it in the Vale very successfully as well. But beyond that, we obviously support group guided reading as well. We support the development of a reading curriculum. Again, just with Oracy, we also provide bespoke coaching and mentoring in schools for specific schools as and when requested. No difference really to the writing. Writing is going to be a huge area of investment for Central South for a number of years, I think, really. So we've got asynchronous content, which is called Teaching Writing Explicitly, which takes you on the complete writing journey. We have the Get Writing Toolkit, which provides teachers with a toolkit of strategies and approaches they can action straight away into the classroom. We've got synchronous professional development called the Writing Revolution, again, a really intensive writing writing programme designed to support teachers' pedagogy for writing. We're offering, again, in-school coaching and support for writing as well, and we're funding schools to participate, should they wish, in the comparative judgment work, which is helping to, helping schools not only sort of get an accurate baseline for where their schools are with regards to writing, but also the areas of development for them as schools with regards to their curriculum planning for writing. So that's sort of a very, very quick overview of our literacy strategy. You can see it in the appendix. It does take you through some of the different programmes that we have on offer and what they do. And so you can have a little read about that. But if there's any questions at all about any of those programmes, just please let me know. And I think that's me done for the literacy strategy. I think Caris is going to pick up some of the Welsh aspects now.
Thank you, Kath. And just to explain a bit, as well as the literacy strategy Kath has outlined, there is additional support available for all Welsh medium schools in the Vale. All Welsh medium schools have a Welsh in Education officer, and they would work closely with the schools and offer bespoke and targeted support if needed in relation to literacy and Welsh. There's also been a strong focus over a number of years on increasing learners' confidence in using Welsh, not only in the classroom, but outside the classroom and in social context. And that's been promoted through what we call the Siarter Iaith, the Welsh Language Charter. So that's been in place over a number of years, but obviously the COVID impacted on the promotion of the charter. So it was relaunched in the region in May 2021 again. And, you know, sort of all, as a result, all Vale Welsh medium schools have re-engaged with the Siarter Iaith initiative, and there's activities ongoing with pupils and parents, actually, in order to gain further confidence in speaking Welsh. So you've just got a few examples there in terms of Penargarth. They've had challenges for pupils and parents and carers to learn Welsh through Duolingo. They've had a virtual workshop with the Welsh Language Children's Laureate, and they've also done some work in pupils from Penargarth using their Welsh in supporting pupils in Victoria Primary and working with a Welsh artist as part of that project. And similarly, you'll see Gwen and Nant, they've been using their Welsh to support, for example, work with Oakfield Primary and making sure that the Criw Cymraeg there are familiar with some words and phrases for use with the big box bwyd. There's also, finally, in terms of Welsh, there's been a new resource developed by the Consortium, the Welsh Immersion Resource Pack, and that's to support pupils who are latecomers to Welsh medium education. But the nature of that support and that resource is also actually suitable to use with pupils who've been impacted due to COVID and has been regression in terms of their literacy skills. So there's been a lot of training available to schools to support the use of the resource, and you can see there's an example in the written report about how South Cerrig have developed daily activities where they use resources linked to the Welsh language immersion resource to promote the use of Welsh with pupils across the school. So that gives you a flavour, in a sense, in terms of the CSE support between the languages and Welsh. And just really to finish by making reference to the current foci and the next steps. In a sense, work is very much ongoing in relation to this area. Improvement partners this year are working closely with schools and monitoring progress in relation to the priorities in the school's development plan. And that will ensure that there's a regular focus on what schools are doing in relation to addressing the impact of COVID, and in particular pupils' literacy skills. There's also ongoing work between the improvement partner and school leaders on addressing the use and impact of the RRS grant with leaders and the impact that grant is having on specific groups of pupils. Cass mentioned the CSE professional learning programme to support literacy, and obviously there's work ongoing there throughout this academic year and onwards really to monitor the impact of this professional learning. And in terms of the Welsh and Education team, they're continuing to provide support. They've developed the Welsh Immersion resource pack for primary schools, but there's work developing and ongoing to develop a similar pack for the secondary sector. And again, that will support pupils that their literacy skills has been impacted by COVID in the secondary sector, but also at the top of Key Stage 2 in the primary sector as well. So, you know, there's a strong focus ongoing on supporting schools to address the challenges that they faced in relation to pupils' literacy skills and how COVID has impacted on pupils' literacy skills. So I'd like to bring it to an end there, but we're very happy, Kath and myself, to answer any questions that anyone will have.
Okay, thank you both for a very comprehensive report. It was interesting to read, particularly what certain schools in the Vale are, the way they're addressing these issues. Can I just stress to Kath the fact that you can't see many of the members on screen is not a sort of any concerns we have, particularly with them not wanting to show themselves, but we are encouraged not to effectively use up too much of the resources we have by using the video if we can avoid it. So it's nothing to do with any concerns, and I have no concerns about members' contributions. Does any member wish to? I think you stunned everyone into silence, but I think that's really the fact that we've had a very, very detailed report, and I can't see anyone indicating, but
should there be any further questions? Obviously happy, you know, for anything to come via email or.
Oh, thank you very much for that. No, I think it is very, you know, and it's been interesting to watch my two grandsons during this as to. I certainly know the 5-year-old doesn't seem to have suffered as far as Oracy is concerned. He still chatters away 19 to the dozen, and but no, I think it is noticeable. There has been an effect upon them, you know, just to an extent, perhaps. Yes. Okay. Well, if no one wants to contribute, there are 3 recommendations, I think, to the report. Well, firstly, that we considered the findings report. Well, we confirm that we've done that. We recognise the ongoing strategic work undertaken by schools, and that we consider its support available. Well, can I just say that I think we should be very supportive, very appreciative of the work that's being done, because obviously these skills are ones which are very, very important for children, not just now, but through the rest of the school career and indeed through their whole life. You know, the ability to communicate effectively with everyone. So I think, can we thank everyone for the efforts that are being made and the hard work that's being undertaken. Okay, I think I can see nodding now that members are showing themselves on camera. Sorry, I was not trying to sort of frighten you into having to come forward and show yourselves, but thank you all very much. And again, thank you both for the presentation. It was well worthwhile.
Yeah.
Okay, then, if we move on to effectiveness and efficiency, a report again from Central South Consortium.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'm going to introduce this, and then I've got some colleagues who are going to come in and join us. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you this evening. As you are all aware, Central South is the regional school improvement service and provides the school improvement support to Central South. And we've talked to you quite a lot over the last year around some of the work that's been happening. So we've shared information with you on remote and blended learning, curriculum for Wales, use of the PDG, how we work with schools and our accountability framework, and obviously we've had the input on literacy today. But one of the things that we are doing is encouraging members across all of the local authorities to really look at the impact of the regional service and the effectiveness of that service. So what we've got for you today in the report is a document that looks at our financial spend basically over the last year, how that's worked out across different local authorities. And we've also picked a number of strands of our work to be able to share with people and what the impact of that has been. And this is a document that we will be taking to our joint committee, and it is an opportunity for local authorities to hold us to account for the work that we've been doing. So Louise will take us through the headlines of the report, and Caris, and Andrew Williams is also with us. So if there are specific questions that link any of that work to schools within the Vale of Glamorgan, then we'll happily take those at the end of the session. So if it's okay, I'll hand over to Louise.
Thank you, Clara. Good evening, everybody. I'll take you, hopefully not too extensively, through the report, trying to pull out sort of the key headlines for you, and commenting on how we've organised the report and where it's come from. To give you a little bit of background, this is an annual report that we produce, and it used to be called the Value for Money Report many years ago, and it's now developed into this effectiveness and efficiency report. And even it looks very different even to a few years ago to what it does today. As you can see from the contents of how the report is structured, predominantly in previous years, there would have been a huge overview on performance, and it would have included all the performance data of the regional and local authority and subsequently local authorities, breakdown of all the ESTIN inspections and the performance with ESTIN and inspection outcomes. It would have had categorisation in there. So you can imagine it would have had a huge amount of data in there in previous iterations, but due to the current situation we find ourselves in, that is not currently in there, and there's an explanation for that within the report. However, as Clara has mentioned, we do though provide you an overview of how Central South use the funding that it's available to it, and how the different local authorities, it breaks down into the different local authority spends. And then we cover each year particular areas are agreed at joint committee, supported by the CSC Management Board, of which the Directors of Education sit, as to the particular strands of work that they would like us to present a more detailed look on an annual basis. And so I'll take you through those this evening. So the first part of the report really just goes through how we extensively use self-evaluation as the impetus to identify the priorities within our organisation, and how we are held to account through that business planning cycle. We then ensure that we are challenged through the different local authority scrutiny performance meetings, as well as meeting monthly with the management board, of which the directors sit, and ultimately with joint committee. If I take us to section 4, though, the overview of funding, we do have two particular strands of funding available to us, and that is the core funding that's provided via the local authorities, and predominantly that funds the main school improvement work that goes on, led by Caris within the Vale of Glamorgan and the improvement partners based within those schools. So we also then have available to us the grants that are provided by Welsh Government. But table 1 of the report outlines for you, or breaks down for you, the amount each local authority contributes to Central South, and then actually identifies the how that spend is distributed, and gives you an overview of that spend. So from table 1, you can see that there is one of the local authorities across the region that actually benefited this time or in this particular accounting period, and that is one of the benefits of regional working, in that the need in the region, funding and resourcing can be moved to those particular areas of need as and when required. We then move on to look at the amount of grant that was received into the consortium approved by members of the Joint Committee in this particular accounting period 2021, and that is now the RC-SIG, the Regional Consortium School Improvement Grant, which previously would have been the EIG grant. And if we go back even further, it would have been all the 11 sort of original grants that became the EIG. There's also the Pupil Development Grant, and the report goes through the processes that we undertake to ensure transparency and accountability for that spend from Welsh Government. Table 3 therefore shows how we allocate those funding in line with our business plan, in line with the terms and conditions of the grant, and again at a very high level breaks down how that funding is allocated across the 5 local authorities that make up Central South. And a lot of this funding, this grant funding, is used to support the Central South Wales Challenge, and schools can therefore bid to become schools to provide that school-to-school support. So a lot of this is dependent on schools coming forward and engaging with us in that self-improving system. So then we combine those 2 areas of spend, the grant spend and the core spend, and you can see in table 4 how that sort of breaks down and the local authorities' share of that particular spend. Another area that we just highlighted within this report is the resource board funding. This is a budget that we identify with the support of the directors and the management board within Central South to support schools in need, and that need is identified throughout the year. And there is a process undertaken led by Caris and Andrew to identify the needs of the particular schools within the local authority, and therefore you will see then the figures in table 5 for you of how much the Vale of Glamorgan schools have benefited from this additional spend. The next section of the report goes through the different strands of foci that I mentioned. And so this year in particular, the strands are governors and the support for governors, digital learning, early career pathways, and then we have leadership support and development. Within support for governors, then, there were 4 main areas that took place during this time period, and that is the development of the self-evaluation toolkit, the professional learning for governors, the work of the governor groups, and the regional leaders of governance. And so for each of those particular areas, the report is structured in a way that shows you what has gone on this year, what evidence of impact do we have to date, and what are our next steps. And so I think it's really important that we learn from those next steps and are able then to incorporate those into the next year. There's a huge amount of work gone on supported by with governors over this time, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank those governors that engage with us, as it's a huge commitment out of their time. And they have been developing the processes for using those self-evaluation toolkits, and the case study at the end of this section actually outlines for you an example of how one of the schools in the region has used that self-evaluation toolkit to benefit their school. There's been a lot of professional learning undertaken. We've moved everything to online, and there's been a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning that has taken place over this time. And you will see that the engagement of governors has hugely increased over the time. And so I think we do need to learn those lessons of why it's been why we've been able to engage much more with governors this time, because of that ability to be able to do this remotely through online systems, the recording of it just as we're doing this evening, and the ability to be able to then access that at a later date in your freedom of your own time. We've then had our governor groups. They are a stakeholder group. They form part of our governance structure within Central South, and they have been a hugely important area, and one of which that feed into the development of Central South as we move forward. And they have supported the development of the final area that is commented on within this report with regards to governors, and that is our new initiative of regional leaders of governors. We now have appointed, I believe, 13 regional leaders of governors, and they are now being deployed across the region. And there's been a robust interview process and recruitment process, and an extensive training and development programme for those as well. So moving on to digital learning. As you can imagine, over this last 2 years, there has been a huge increase in the demands and support for this team, with the move to blended learning initially, and then distance learning, and then back to blended learning, and all combinations in between. The team have been hugely agile in their approaches to this, and have been able to provide the bespoke support that's been required by schools over this time. They've offered network meetings, they've offered live professional learning sessions and webinars, as well as supporting with the asynchronous support as well. There's been identification of particular areas of need. So, for example, production of the asynchronous units of work, specifically to support computational thinking strategies, and those areas where they're identified are continued to be developed over time. Hub and its hub usage has obviously supported this, and there's information in there in the report for you to be able to see how that has affected how we're able to support schools. There are still a number of areas that we need to move forward on, however, and they are again outlined in next steps, and I'll come back to those at the end of the report. The third area and strand report is that of early career pathways. This has been a very difficult area for those NQTs and those undertaking PGC qualifications, PDG qualifications at this time, and so a lot of work has gone into this particular area. This report only really reflects sort of 5 or 6 months worth of work since we identified these areas, and so we are going to move this into the next financial year as well. But you'll see that they have again been developing online collaboration spaces to support those new to the profession and early in their career pathway. Again, the production of asynchronous and synchronous materials. We've been able to develop multi-partnership events. One of the advantages of being virtual is to be able to get all bodies around the table at the same time, with Professor Mick Waters there, and the development of handbooks and materials to support this area of work. They've provided ongoing coaching and mentoring for induction mentors, as well as the external verifier support that's been required. And all the time using as many online methods as possible to be able to determine the needs of those particular groups. So this has led to a huge increase in engagement with those particular members of the profession, and the creation of regional databases and an improved communication strategy to boot. So we've been able to ensure that that is available. We've also included for you some quotes directly from evaluations here as well, so that'll support your understanding of this work. And again, in line with national processes and the conferences that they have led, we've identified numerous areas for development, which will be included and incorporated into our next business planning process. Further case studies, again, can be found at the end of each section for your information. And the final area that we have is the leadership support and development. And that's to ensure that we have a complete pathway all the way through, and professional learning at each stage of those pathways. Within this particular area, there's online delivery modules. Everything has again been moved onto an online footing, and we've ensured that the enrolment criteria means that people are placed onto the correct professional learning programme at their particular point in their career pathway. So within this particular strand of the report, you will see commentary on the middle leaders, senior leaders, aspiring head teachers that lead to MPQH, the actual MPQH programme itself, the programme for new and acting head teachers, experienced head teachers and system leaders. So you can see a huge area that we support in there. And again, the person leading this from Central South has identified on every single one of those particular strands and programmes the areas of next steps and development. And the case study that you can see at the end of that particular area shows how the Middle Leaders Programme, for example, has had, and how it's evaluated and the findings that come out of those particular programmes. So I'll lead us on to the conclusions then and the further recommendations. So although funding has meant a reduction in per pupil spend over time from £28.60 down to £23.35, we've still been able to show that we've been able to impact on those children and young people across our region. We have very high delegation rates of grant funding. We're one of the highest across Wales for delegation of funding. And we do, as a conclusion, we do in particular years provide that cross-subsidisation across LA's local authorities for particular areas of need. We are able to provide a consistent and flexible approach to our deployment of staff, and because of the regional footing that we work on, we've been able to recruit exceedingly high calibre members of staff and provide them with a high quality professional learning programme. Hopefully I've been able to illustrate here how responsive we can be to the changes that have been, or the challenges and changes over the last 2 years. And within here, we have the evidence of our effective practice on the impact in those particular focus areas that are the subject of this report. And finally, within the recommendations, all of the recommendations have been accepted by CSC's management board. They will then go to joint committee, as Clara mentioned earlier, and will be incorporated into the next round of our business planning process, just as the local authority priorities will be as soon as we work with the local authorities to get those, and we'll get those embedded to ensure that the local authority priorities are embedded throughout, and we'll be able to monitor and come back to you with progress on those particular areas. I will pause there and then invite both Clara, Andrew and Caris back in for discussion and to respond to any comments or queries members may have.
Okay, thank you. Who's going next? Yep. Okay.
There'll be, if anyone's got any questions for us.
Don't think so at the moment. No.
I think there's an awful lot of information in that to take in. Yes. But I think it's setting the context of the support that you get and the information that you get from Caris in the context of the region and the support that is provided right across the region. So I hope that people have found that useful and interesting. And again, if there are questions that come at a later time, we're very happy to respond to those questions.
Okay,
that's us, Chair.
Okay, I've got no. It is. There is, as you say, a heck of a lot of information in that report, and it takes a bit of digesting, and kind of had to read through it a few times myself really to get the details. But can I thank you all for that. I note we've only got. Well, we're saying note in the report, so are members happy to note the report?
Aye.
Yes, happy to note, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, well, again, thank you all very much for your contribution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving along then. Agenda item 7, support for young carers.
Can you hear me?
Thank you, Martine.
Chair, can you hear me okay?
I can certainly hear you okay, yes.
Okay, I'll make a start.
Yes,
better when
I
you're
can
sitting
hear
forward, Martine.
I haven't put my headphones on, Chair, so I just wanted to make a start. Okay, good evening, and I've come this evening to give you an update on the support given to young carers in terms of education and how we collaborate with colleagues. And I wanted to give a bit more context in the numbers of young carers, because I know when it came last time, there was discussion about young carers. So I want to give you an update on how we're supporting young carers within education, and then talk a little bit more about the numbers. So in terms of support and guidance, as a vulnerable groups team, we work really closely with social services and the third sector and schools to provide direct support for young carers. And we've been really pleased with our partnership with our management information systems colleagues in making sure that we can generate reports to support us, to support schools in monitoring the attendance of young carers. And the good thing about that partnership, it meant we had to fine-tune our identification strategies and support for schools. So the first partnership that we feel that has helped us with that is our collaboration with the Young Carers Trust South East Wales. And that third sector organisation has helped us because they've had a lot of contact with our operational and strategic leads in schools, and they've been able to work with us so we can evaluate the support the schools are given for young carers. So we make sure that when schools are doing something well, that it's shared within our authority and other local authorities. One of the things that was identified by Young Carers Trust South East Wales was schools using a one-page profile. So therefore, the learning needs and the holistic needs of the young carer were shared in a way that the young carer was centre of the decision making. And these one-page profiles were identified as good practice and shared with other secondary schools and were implemented by operational and strategic leads. And one of the things that's been identified is we need to do more awareness raising with our governing bodies and our elected members, just so we can flag up all the good work that's being done and also some of the complexities of work with young carers. And the Young Carers Trust Wales have worked with us to create a pilot for how we support young carers in primary school. And our first school that's achieved the Best Practice Award is Victoria Primary School in Penarth. One of the other ways we support young carers with our schools is with the Families First Advice Line. Now, that has been, sorry, I do apologise. That has been really good because it meant that we could work really closely with children's services to make sure that we fine-tune our referral pathway and make sure that the young carers had the most appropriate service. And one of the things that we investigated was how we can ensure that young carers get the appropriate level of support. And when working with Families First Advice Line, we identified that some of the young carers may not have been offered an assessment, the statutory function, just because third sector partners were doing assessments, but not the statutory assessments. So working with Families First Advice Line, we've been very clear with schools and partners that we have to offer an assessment. That is a requirement of the Social Service and Wellbeing Act. And carers can refuse that assessment. But if they do require an assessment, if they do want to be assessed by Families First Advice Line, then they can have a more in-depth assessment by social services. And that's the right thing to do. And that way the young carer and their family have the appropriate level of support, especially when they've got more complex needs. And what we found out with the 9 that agreed to go through the Families First Advice Line pathway, 3 that had the assessment was very successful, and 6 were triaged to the Young Carers Project in Barry. And that was good because their needs were identified. They were verified as young carers, but it was identified they were more wanted more youth service type work and more after school activities rather than direct support in schools. So what we've been happier with is that we've got a really robust system with the Families First Advice Line, so that we as an authority know we are fulfilling our statutory functions. And now we've got that system as good as it can be, and we are evaluating it with social services regularly, is that we can work really closely with our schools on the identification. Because what we found out, and listening to what was said earlier on about the impact of COVID, the impact of COVID has meant that we've had to work really hard to make sure that the young carers access the right level of support, and the identification of them is key. So in order to identify the young carers, we worked with our colleagues in MIS to make sure that the SIM system has an area for the schools to record if they're a young carer and if we've got parental permission to share that information outside of the school. And what we found out is that lots of the young carers were happy to be identified, but their families were very clear that they did not give that permission. And the idea is that the schools keep asking that question in an appropriate way, but as long as the schools can identify the young carer and offer school-based support, then that for us as local authorities is a good thing, because making sure that the schools know who they are so we can offer that school-based support was key for us as a vulnerable groups team. And also we're working with third sector partners, because underreporting we know is a challenge, but what we feel more confident about is that schools have got an area to say they are a young carer, this is a school-based support. The parents are refusing for them to be identified as young carers or to be assessed, and this is why. And then the school can support that young carer regardless of if the parent doesn't want them identified outside of the school, but the parent is aware of what the school-based support looks like for that young carer. So our numbers of young carers, it has risen to 173, and only 9 have been verified with the Families First Advice Line. So we know that's a small number. So it's making sure that we carry on working with families on a hearts and minds project for them to understand that being offered an assessment isn't a daunting, scary task. But we are pleased that schools are identifying them, and that means that we can draw from the school's identification SIM systems, we can draw from that and we can create a local authority list of children who are young carers. And then what we've been doing is cross-referencing the census we draw on a termly basis with schools to make sure that those children are still young carers. And what we identified when we were data cleansing and cross-referencing, especially with the young carers in I would say our border schools. So with the young carers, for example, in Cowbridge Comprehensive School, that school has to do referral pathways or offer referral pathways for the Vale and Bridgend as well. So it's making sure that the schools are clear what the referral pathways are with our neighbouring authorities, whether it's Bridgend, RCT and Cardiff. We want to make sure if they're in a Vale school, they can access the appropriate support, even if that support needs to come from another authority. So what we've discovered is that identification has improved, but making sure that schools can offer support from the Families First Advice Line is there. We just need to transfer those 173 to make sure that more families are more open to having support from the Families First Advice Line. But we are pleased that the operational and strategic leads for young carers have engaged, and it meant that we've had a register of operational strategic leads that we've updated. And during the lockdown, the first and second, the vulnerable learner check-ins meant that we were able to identify the young carers and identify what enhanced school-based support we could be providing for those children and their families. One of the things that was really popular with the older young carers was hub places offered for their younger siblings. So that was their way of getting respite, their younger siblings going to the hub and them having some time just to study and do their online learning without having to care for their younger members of their family. I felt like I didn't take a breath, Chair. So that is how we in education support young carers at the moment.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Does any member have a question? Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martin. It was a very comprehensive, quick trip around the subject. I'm gratified to see the numbers improving and that more schools seem to be engaging with us than previously, particularly certain secondary schools. However, I still think the numbers are low for what we've got. I would expect the actual numbers to be larger in each school, all of the schools, and so that certain areas and certain schools, I think, this would feature larger. I'm also concerned that only 9, I think you said, of the ones that are identified went on to further work and so on that's been going on, and kids who are having to be young carers at home are disadvantaged in many ways. The stresses and strains on those kids are hugely disabling for them in terms of educational and social outlets. And I'm surprised that so many of the ones that have been identified aren't engaging with further with us. I don't understand why they're not, unless there is something that they are frightened of, that they're frightened of losing control, losing power, losing influence within the family, being pushed aside. And there are all sorts of reasons that I can think of why these kids might be struggling to engage with this. And I'm at a loss to recommend any way forward to improve this, but other than to sort of emphasise the identification of young carers and the fact that they will benefit from support, and it can be good fun. They can find good things involved in the kind of supports they've got. That's the only thing I think suggest in terms of communication with these young carers, but certainly I would hope to see this time next year a more fluid way forward with these kids to support them in both their education and their caring role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Perhaps before I let Martine come back in, I can see Sandra wants to speak, and then Rhiannon. So perhaps we'll have those contributions, then perhaps come back to you, Martine, for any comments you may have. Sandra.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you for that information, Martine. It was really interesting to have the different figures and stuff like that. I just wondered if you're able to tell me if you have a certain timetable of working with different schools. So 1 month you could be working for Pencoitree, or is it sort of like just open to whatever schools contact yourself? I'm particularly interested in that there was only 8 young carers identified in Pencoitree School, where I would imagine the figure is a lot higher than that. And also my last sort of question is, what is the extra educational provision that these young carers are given? If you could just talk a little bit around that, please, to ensure that they stay at a similar level to their peers. I know that we've seen previously that it's quite difficult for young carers to actually maintain the same sort of level of not ability, but a level of study as other students. I just wondered if you could talk about that, please.
Right, let's take those questions, Chair. Or
I don't know whether Rhiannon, have you got particular questions?
Yes, I wanted to comment on. First of all, can I thank you for the report? Very thorough. I mean, my experience is that many children do not wish to identify themselves as being carers because they see it as being a pejorative term. They don't want their peers to know exactly what they're doing at home because some of them consider it to be embarrassing or degrading, especially if we're talking about personal care for a parent or a sibling. Many parents, in my experience, do not want the children to let on that they are carers because they are afraid of the involvement of social services. Because quite honestly, some of the care that these children undertake for parents and siblings or other relatives is such that you couldn't pay them enough if they were doing it as jobs. And they are doing things which are actually beyond the capacity of their age and understanding, many of them, which is very sad. And for some of them, it takes their childhood away. And so you can see why parents and relatives don't want children to be identified as such, because they're afraid of someone coming in and finding out what the situation is. I mean, sometimes I think those fears are groundless. Sometimes they're not. I wonder whether it's possible to kind of talk to children in general, not just carers, children who've identified as carers. To talk about the kind of the positive aspects of this, how it's not it's not a derogatory thing to be identifying yourself as undertaking these tasks for people, etc. And I think also, I mean, I'm picking up on what Sandra was talking about educational catch-up for these children. I mean, I think also social catch-up for some of these children. They walk out of the school gates and they become parents the minute they walk through the front door. And I mean, we all know as parents, that's hard enough work when you come out from a day's work and you go home and you have to make tea, put children to bed, put the laundry on, and then think about what you're supposed to be doing tomorrow, as well as the fact you've ironed your shirts. So the idea that children, some of them as young as like 8 or 9 years old, are having to do these things. I mean, my concern would be that they lose out on the kind of social aspect of being a child. I mean, I know the last 2 years have been appalling for everybody in that respect anyway, but they're suffering from that to an even greater extent than the ordinary child. So I wondered if you could, have a think about some of what I just said there.
Right, thank you for that, Rhiannon. I think you really hit many nails on the head there with that, because I think there are lots of concerns with young carers, which is, you know, as you say, as what their peers are going to think about this, and obviously, as you say, they're obviously concerned about the consequences for the siblings or the parents that they care for, and I think that's probably why we don't get the numbers coming forward and actually identifying as that. And it's very, very difficult to know exactly how we address that. But I don't know, Martine, can you help us on that?
The first question I wanted to talk about was, why are they so low? Can you hear me okay?
We can. It wasn't great to start off with, but I think, yeah, that's better now.
Hold on. I'll put my headphones back on. Is that clearer?
Yes, a lot better. Thank you, Martin.
Okay, thank you. In terms of why so low, the good thing is that the schools identify there's underreporting. So the schools have identified that it's an ongoing, it's not once a year we do a push for young carers to be identified. It's an ongoing conversation. And that's a positive. So I'm not saying that will fix the lower numbers, but the fact that it's a longer term project, it's not something that we can just do with Young Carers Week, for example. And in terms of how do we work with schools, in terms of that question, we meet with the operational and strategic leads in all of the schools. And again, we remind them of the different strategies they can use, the more public strategies, so whether or not it's assemblies or in the secondaries, in the form tutors, so that it isn't just we're going to talk to young carers or to the group that do the young carers dropping on a Tuesday lunchtime. It's that when children are told about young carers, they're told as a whole school community, and they're often, and what I was really impressed with was that it seems to be more of and I think that's where working with the Young Carers Trust Wales, they've talked about treating it as a superpower, how amazing it is and how special you are. So they've tried to switch it on its head. And it's really good going to schools and seeing the notice boards, and their young carers notice boards is very much about the young carers. Being a young carer, you are a superstar, that you've got superpowers, think of all the things you can do and think of all the help available. So changing the narrative, I think, will help longer term with when schools, because lots of the time the schools say, we know they're a young carer, we know that, but trying to get the young person to say, actually, yes, I am, and then ask the family to say, yes, I am, is they've said that that's an ongoing piece of work. But they said as a school community, they work really hard on awareness raising on an individual level and either in a class or a assembly level, that the benefits there are of being a young carer, and it's not something to be ashamed of, because there is a lot of shame about being a young carer. So it's making sure that there is understanding about there's more than one profile of being a young carer. It may be a case where you've got to do personal care for a parent, or it could be doing activities, extra activities with your younger siblings. So we've tried to make sure that the guidance is there is more than one profile of being a carer, and therefore there's more than one way to support a young carer. So having that expertise in schools is good, because it means that we can remind them if there's new training and there's new guidance being given out, we can share it with schools quite quickly. So we have gone back and said that because it's January PLASC time, we've asked for them to relook at their data submissions. So we're hoping for January 2022, it will be higher. But I've said to the school, as long as you'll keep having that conversation, we will be happy. And as long as the school-based support is what the child needs, because one of the things when I met with young carers in the lockdown, they talked about, we don't want you as grown-ups to tell us what we want. We want you to listen to what we want. And that's why when the vulnerable check-ins were going in, sometimes they wanted a wellbeing pack because they didn't want any attention brought to them, because especially when the schools were going out and doing the visits and dropping off things, they said it's embarrassing when the school drops off food when next door they only drop off a few resources for reading. So it's making sure we listen to the young carer and listen to what they want the adults to do rather than what we think, because sometimes it's easy when we're working with schools to say we've had some research, this is what we think, because the good thing about our young carers in the Vale, they are quite articulate to tell us when we're doing things wrong, especially if we're giving them the wrong type of support. So I think making sure that the schools use various ways to raise awareness and that we can meet with the operational strategic leads on a regular basis is helping that. And in terms of what extra provision, again, it's child-centred. Sometimes it may be extra provision at lunchtime, but it's always very discreet. So if they want extra help, if they want to do a homework club, they want to do a homework club, not just for young carers, a homework club that everybody else is doing, so that they've said that we can feel like we fit in with everybody else. So it's trying to be very subtle, but if they do want to identify as a young carer, that there is that young carers support group, and all the secondary schools have a very explicit support group. But often they've said sometimes we just want to go to the library at lunchtime with a bit of extra help with our friends. And sometimes our friends don't want to come to the young carers groups. So it's making sure that the extra support is child-led. And that's why it's really helpful that when the schools identify them, they can come up with their own school register, and then they are monitoring the progress the young carers are or aren't making. And if they're not making them, the schools have talked about how they're putting the additional support in place. And one of the things that I thought was quite interesting when we asked about what does support look like for a certain profile of young carers that care for younger siblings, the secondary schools talk about staggered days, so that the young carers are able to be a bit later for school, but they have a pass. So when they walk into their, for example, English lesson, the teacher doesn't say, well, why are you late? So having that staggered start and end of day, again, the schools work with the young people and the families to support them in a way that works for them. Because at first, when we talked about staggered days, I was quite concerned. I thought children are missing out on lessons. But what they've said that happens when that does happen, we make sure the teacher can give that child the extra support they need when they come in the class in an appropriate way. That it's not you're late because you're a young carer. Oh, it's you're late because you get extra help with something else. It's the schools have to work really hard to make sure that the young carers' identity of being a young carer is only shared in an appropriate way to them. So what the help looks like, I'd like to say there is one way, but as I'm learning with young carers, it varies, and also varies on what they feel their learning needs are. And the last thing I wanted to say, I said about in terms of awareness raising, in fact, there's lots of assembly resources that are whole school resources, and the insets as well are not just, for example, for the wellbeing team, they are whole school insets, they're departmental insets. So I think that inclusivity of resources to raise awareness, I think that's been a good opportunity to share that with schools. And so the next step is that we share that level of support for our governing bodies and for our elected members too.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it is difficult that the adults, think they probably know what's best for everyone, but it is important that we listen to the very important to listen to the young carers, because we have to bear in mind how, I think how cruel other children can be, either very often unintentionally, but sometimes intentionally. So we have to be very careful that we don't put any further pressure on these young carers. Cabinet member wants to come in at this point. I'm sure members are happy with that.
Yeah, if I could, Chair, I just wanted to comment. I mean, this is a phenomenal piece of work, and as you'll see from the front of the report, Martine is the Vulnerable Groups Manager, so she could probably have commented on the first report that we had to do with children that are looked after. And what I have to say is, when you talk to Martine, the depth of knowledge of the challenges and issues that are being faced by our children that find not only education but life in general very difficult. And in Martine, they have somebody that is on their side. They have somebody that is their voice in a school environment, their voice in situations like this, and certainly a voice to me. And I'm really pleased to see that the amount of work that's gone into it is being recognised, and also as part of the inclusion team, because when we quite often look at reports and talk about you know, the gaps in attainment, the gaps in outcome, the young people that are not in education, employment or training. It's these young people that are supported by Martine and her colleagues. So I just want to say, you know, superb report, and thank you ever so much for being their voice.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure, yeah, we can all echo that in Martine's contribution towards this and the ongoing work. Martine, if you want to add something to that.
Yes, something that I didn't put in the report because we just do it. In terms of Key Stage 4 to Key Stage 5 transition for young carers, we do have a member of the team, and she specialises in transition. So when the young people are identified as young carer in Key Stage 4, we still support them to make sure that do everything we can so they don't become NEETs. And because we do it for the other vulnerable groups, it's just another group of young people we do it for. So I do apologise, Chair, for not putting in the group, because it's something that we would do with Cardenfell College, Bridgend College, wherever that young person goes. We'll make sure that if they need additional help for their application forms or interview techniques, all of those things we do for all of our different vulnerable groups, and we do them for our young carers too. And I'm very proud of our young carers, and that's when I said they're very articulate. They do give us a hard time, especially if they think we've got something wrong in the way we support them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it is important to remember that they don't suddenly cease to become carers. They might not be young carers anymore, but they're very often still carers, and that can be just as difficult when they're coming into adulthood to have to continue to look after younger siblings and or parents. It's something very important we need to remember. Okay, right. I'd simply ask, I think, committee to note the work that's ongoing, and particularly to express our thanks to Martine for and everyone else involved in this with what is a very difficult situation. So I think we'd all be happy to do that. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Can I just intervene here and say I'm going to have to leave the meeting. I've got Penarth Town Council now.
Okay, that's
okay. Right. Thank you very much for everything that's so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Right. Okay. We come on to the nitty-gritty now of finance. I think agenda.
Sorry, Chair.
Unless I've missed any reports. So yeah, capital revenue and capital monitoring. Yes.
Sorry, Chair.
Gemma.
I need to leave. I've got Atlantic Major Town Council now. Everybody's having meetings tonight.
Well, thank you. I think it shows, unfortunately, that how difficult it can be to actually get people to stand for some of the things that we have these members with dual roles. But we've got to be very appreciative of the people that contribute in that way. So, okay, Jane.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Gemma.
Hello. Good evening. This is the revenue and capital monitoring to the end of November. In terms of revenue, there has been a change from the previous report. We're now reporting a break-even position within the service. School transport does continue to be a pressure, and partly due to increased demand, but also significant pressures within the market. But this pressure is able to be broadly offset by underspends across the service. The efficiency savings are expected to be achieved in year. And then picking up some key points in the capital programme, given the time of year, we have got some slippage being requested across a number of schemes. In paragraph 2.10, the Band B Barry Waterfront scheme, there has been a request for some additional inflationary costs. So we're requesting some temporary funding of 280,000 be moved across from the contingency budget. This has been requested from Welsh Government, and we've also requested to increase the Section 106 developers contribution in 22-23 by 280,000. In terms of Appendix 2, expenditure is progressing well. There are some schemes where we are awaiting the final account to hit the ledger, and there are some schemes where we're awaiting the outcome of the condition surveys, but that's due this month. Those are the main things I was going to pick up. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
No, I think it's a welcome report as always. I've got no particular questions to ask or comments to make. Any member? No. Okay then. Well, once again, Gemma, thank you for everything.
Great. Thank you very much.
And and this is now your last meeting of the day. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry we've kept you so long. Okay. So if we note the report committee, I'm sure you're happy with that.
Yeah,
so then
moved recommendations.
Thank you for that. Okay. Right, we move on now to agenda item 9, which says a report of the managing director. I'm assuming the managing director isn't with us, so if I go through that, well, this is the third quarter scrutiny recommendations tracking report. As always with this, and it is a standard report which members are well familiar with. It tracks the progress made on scrutiny recommendations and to asking members to consider the updated forward work programme to gather any slippage for the current year. I would mention that I had a meeting earlier this month with officers to look at this at the format and this report generally, and I think an up-to-date report was circulated to members yesterday. And during the discussions on that that I had with officers, we were looking at ways perhaps of trimming the forward work programme, but it was pointed out that many of the reports have either been written that are going to go to the come to scrutiny, have either been written or are well in the process of being written, and that I think in those circumstances, I think it'd be wrong for us not to take those reports. But we looked at the following. Firstly, removing the youth engagement and progression report from the upcoming March 2022 meeting. The data which will be captured in performance monitoring, and then we thought it was best to remove the already tracked quarters from the forward work programme appendix with tracking reports, and then in looking at drafting the 2022-23 forward work programme. Updating reports will not be added unless they have been specifically recommended by committee during the 21-22 municipal year. I think sometimes we just get into a habit of having reports coming to us because that's always been done in the past. So I think we have to perhaps be more proactive in looking at what we need to come to committee. The school admission arrangements for 2023-24 that report has been removed. There have been no significant changes to the arrangements which require us to be involved in that. That's what we've looked at, and that's what's reflected in what's now before us. But of course, that is subject to committee's agreement. as far as Appendix A is concerned, the recommendations, all recommendations there have been completed. I will also mention that we've had a request from CSC. They'd like to bring their spring term update on the RE curriculum for Wales to the to our April meeting, and I'm sure members will be happy with that. So if members are happy to agree, we agree the status of the actions listed in Appendix A and approve the proposed changes to the committee forward work programme schedule and the updated version to be uploaded to the council's website. So are members happy that we proceed on that basis?
Can I ask a question, Chair?
Yes?
Yeah, what happened to the task and finish group?
What happened to the task and finish group? Very good question. Well, I think we've probably exhausted the task and finish group. I know, are you going to come in and comment on that, Kath? Is that exactly where we are?
Yes, Chair. I am aware there has been a delay to us having further meetings on that, and I do apologise to members. I'm in the process of sort of taking an overview of all of the minutes that we've taken and all of the evidence we've heard. I'm going to put a recommendation report together for members' consideration that can hopefully be brought to committee as soon as possible. It's being drafted alongside all of my other work, but I will get it done as soon as I can and circulate it to you.
And the reason I asked, Chair, is that I'm quite aware that May is coming up, and certain members of the TNF might no longer be members of the TNF after May. Or I wish everybody well. And it really is a matter of, to hang it over onto a new committee and onto a new TNF group, which may be the situation after May, kind of makes all the work that we have done a little having to be repeated. Thank you.
No, I agree entirely with that, and I don't think we want to. Well, it's difficult to try and extend it forward to another municipal year, or another, not municipal year, but another, as you say, another council, where members may be missing from this committee for various reasons. So no, I think I appreciate that Kath has got a lot of work to do, but I'm hopefully we get this the final report before committee during this current year.
Certainly be with you before May.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay then, so on that basis, that brings our meeting to an end. Thank you all for your attendance, and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Good night all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.